For most Christians, there are two special days in the year that are of considerably greater religious significance than any other. Personally, I think there ought to be three such days, Pentecost being the third, but for most people it's only the two, those two being, of course, Christmas and Easter. And of the two, the New Testament would clearly suggest that it's Easter that we should regard as the more important. After all, two of the Gospels never even bother to mention Christ's birth, while all four of them tell the story of the resurrection. In his letters, Paul never talks about the birth of Jesus and never stops talking about the resurrection. The early church didn't even celebrate the birth of Christ until many, many years after the fact. While it celebrated the resurrection and marked that as a special day from literally day one, all of which would suggest that it's Easter that is the more significant of the two, but you would never guess that from our celebration of these two occasions, because in terms of all of the activities surrounding them, it's clear that we make the bigger deal of Christmas. It's not even close. After all, who puts up decorations both inside and outside your house at Easter, like so many of us do at Christmas? Who buys as many gifts at Easter, especially expensive gifts, as we do at Christmas? Who has an Easter tie, or an Easter vest, or sweater, or blinking bow tie, like so many of us do for Christmas? And sure, there are special musical concerts and programs around Easter, but nowhere near as many as there are during the Christmas season. Just ask the professional musicians among us when they're busiest. When are you busiest, Christmas or Easter? Thank you. I was a little worried there for a second. But why is that? Why is it that Christmas is so much busier? When's the last time you went to an Easter party? I'm sure I've been to someone's house for Easter dinner, but honestly, I can't recall ever in my life going to something advertised as an Easter party. Whereas there are so many Christmas parties every year that it's almost not humanly possible to attend them all. And again, why? Why, if Easter is every bit as important to us as Christmas, if not more so? Why do all of us make so much of a bigger deal of Christmas than we do Easter? I guess if we were really pushed to come up with an answer to that question, we'd probably end up blaming it all on the commercialization of Christmas. The fact that so many people have figured out so many ways to make so much money off this holiday. And there's certainly a long tradition of doing exactly that, both doing the commercialization itself, but also blaming it for just about everything that we think is wrong with Christmas. And no doubt that commercialization is a big part of the problem here, but I think there's a lot more to it than just that. Another part of it is, I think, simply the time of year that we celebrate these two holidays. Easter, of course, occurs in the spring every year when the days are getting longer. The grass is getting greener and the flowers are beginning to appear, and so everyone is naturally feeling cheerier and more upbeat. So we don't really need a party then. Christmas, by contrast, falls in the dead of winter. on very nearly the shortest day of the year, a time when both cheer and light are in short supply. In other words, at a time of year when we need cheering up, so naturally, it's party time. In fact, the winter solstice was a partying time of year long before the birth of Christ. And all of that partying was simply carried over into the Christian celebration of Christmas. But still, I think there's more to it than just that. More than that involved in the big deal that we make of Christmas. And unlike the other two things that I've mentioned, the commercialization and the time of year that we celebrate Christmas, this other reason actually has something to do with the Christmas story itself. And in particular, the Christmas story as it is told by Luke, which for most of us is the Christmas story. The story that shapes our understanding not only of the circumstances surrounding Christ's birth, but actually our understanding of who Christ is. You remember that part in the Gospels when Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" You remember what they said on that occasion? They answered, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets, but not us." No, you and I don't think of Jesus as being like John the Baptist or Elijah or Jeremiah or even Moses, though you can see why people in his own day might have thought that way. No, when you and I think of Jesus, the Old Testament figure we think in terms of is not Moses or Elijah or Jeremiah or any of the prophets, but rather David. Specifically, King David. And why? Why do we immediately think of King David when we think of Jesus? Because we've all heard the Christmas story. The Christmas story told by Luke. We've heard it our whole lives. It's one of the stories we remember from earliest in our life. And that story, far more than anything else, has shaped our understanding of who Jesus is and what the significance of his life really was. And it's not just the fact that Luke tells us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the same place that David was born, or that Joseph, his father, was of the house and lineage of David, though Luke does make a point of both of those things. Even more, though, it's the fact, I think, that Jesus was born in such humble circumstances. Just like David, who after all was merely a shepherd boy when he was anointed by Samuel, yet went on to become the king over all of Israel. And we all know that Jesus, though born in a stable and laid in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn, would go on, just like David, to become king over all, feted by angels who at his birth sang, "Glory to the newborn King." And more than anything else, I think, that's what our celebration of Christ's birth has become. That's why our celebration has taken on such an outsized form. Because it's a celebration in our minds fit for a king. But there's a problem with that. Actually, a rather large problem. You might even say that we've missed the whole point of the story. For you see, the angels in the gospel, as opposed to the angels in the Christmas carol, never said anything about a newborn king. And neither does Luke. In fact, in his entire gospel, Luke, unlike Matthew, but Luke never calls Jesus a king. Never. In Luke, the only people that call Jesus a king are Pilate and others who are actually mocking Jesus, as if the idea of someone like him being a king was the craziest thing they'd ever heard. Now, to be sure, Luke does say, or rather the angel Gabriel says in our gospel lesson this morning, that Jesus will inherit the throne of his father David, that he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and that of his kingdom there shall be no end. It's all king language. But still, Luke never calls Jesus a king. And I don't think that's an accident. Yes, it is certainly true that David was born in Bethlehem in humble circumstances, and yet went on to become the king over all of Israel. And yes, it's true that Jesus was also born in Bethlehem, also in humble circumstances, and yet went on to be exalted over all the earth. But for all the similarities, there's one big difference. And that one difference makes all the difference in the world. And that is that David, tragically, let being a king go to his head. And in the end, David forgot what it was like to be born of humble status. And that's the difference, because Jesus never did. Jesus never forgot what it was like to be born in a stable, what it was like to be laid in a manger because there was no place. Note, the story doesn't say no room in the inn, it says no place for them in the inn. And Jesus never forgot that. Never forgot that there was no place for people like him in the inn. Which is why Jesus would never say to anyone that there's no place for them in his church. Here, there is a place for everyone. And that is the true message of Christmas. That is the great mystery of the Incarnation. That is the song that angels sang. Not that a poor boy rose to become a king, but that a king came down to be a poor boy. Came down to be a poor boy who never built for himself a palace, whose only crown would be one that was made of thorns, and whose throne was a manger of straw. Which is why today we do not gather to celebrate the birth of a king. We gather to celebrate the birth of a Savior, the birth of our Savior, a Savior who traded a throne in heaven for a manger in Bethlehem, just so he could live with us among those whom he loved. And that, my friends, is cause for celebration.